All right, we are back with the first episode of our new weekly live series, and we'll get started pretty soon. It is, like I've said before, going to be a commentary on other discussions that other people have had. I'm not here to be a critic. I'm here to share what content I think is valuable and ideas that I think are valuable and people who I think are contributing to relevant topics of this project, which is pretty much everything, because it's the theory of everything. But for now, while people filter in, I will just play some of my latest practicings on the ukulele. And for some water. But yeah, I think it's going to be a great show. I think I'm going to start every single live off with just playing the ukulele. People tend to just who doesn't like music? And eventually I'll get good enough to where you might want to actually listen. But I did play it for a coworker today, and they were like, that's actually really good. It's like, well, thanks, but I have not been playing for very long. It's not that good, but I understand why you would say that if you listen to it for like 30 seconds. But we are going to discuss Eric Weinstein's 7th episode on Robert Breedlove's channel. He has done 7 different segments of what appeared to be almost one stream. I'm not exactly sure if it was one stream. If it was like 7 hours, and so it might be different streams. I have not I've not actually paid enough attention to know if it's a separate stream. Gotta look to see if people change their shirts or something. But probably is. I mean, it'd be pretty long if it wasn't. But they are all great. We're gonna do episodes like this on previous episodes of that series. Not all of them, but some of them, because some of them in particular have very important ideas that are discussed. In fact, I will say this, and we will discuss it. The 6th episode, I think it was probably the best description of quantum physics that I've ever seen. Like actual description of quantum field theory and what waves are and what particles are. And I mean, I think that we can go into much more detail to explain it even more simply, but it was very, very good. I highly recommend it. In fact, I recommend watching it before we even do a live commentary on it. But this one we're going to do for the 7th episode, which was the latest one. And it is titled Freedom of Mind. And you can see here, this is Robert Breedlove's channel. I highly recommend subscribing. I don't watch a ton of his videos, but he's a very good interviewer, I can say that, and his content is very good. But this is the stream that we will be discussing. So I have clips that I'm going to play, and then we're going to discuss the clip. I'm going to try and keep all of these lives, like I've done before, under 2 hours. But hopefully this gives content going forward a lot more just conciseness. So, all right. With that, please also hit the like button. Subscribe, hit the bell notification. I hate saying that stuff. I feel like just a salesman, and I'm not, the most natural salesman for things like that. But it will definitely help you keep up with the content. So this is going to be a great year. I'm really looking forward to it. And these lives will get even more structured and produced as we go forward. So with that, though, let's take a look. So to start, one of the really important statements made in this series is right at the beginning. In this episode is right at the beginning, and we're going to discuss it after we listen to it.
Certain things do come to an end. And I think that one of the most interesting is that I think physics in its most fundamental level is about to come to an end. That's very unpopular with the zeitgeist.
Okay, this one, that's difficult for me to accept because using your same analogy, a game of perfect information like chess, I mean, so you think chess would come to an end before physics, wouldn't it?
Sorry, you're making an excellent point. Let me be as clear as I should have been. There are two parts of physics, and the part of physics that you're talking about, which is the consequences of the rules, is nowhere near coming to an end and may be provable that it will never come to an end.
Mm-hmm.
Because how would a computer predict its own behavior? You'd need something larger than the computer. So there will always be a mystery as to what is about to happen next, even if you know all the rules, and even if all the rules are deterministic.
Right. Combinatorial explosion, something like that.
Certainly.
Yeah.
And then there's the question about, are the rules of chess infinite? So let's take chess, which may be finite because the game ends if you make so many rule moves without something happening. So there are ways of limiting chess so you don't chase, have a couple of knights chasing each other into infinity. How long would it take you to figure out all the rules just by watching chess? I don't know. Like very quickly you'd figure out some basic stuff. And then there'd be things like castling en passant, promoting a piece on the final rank. Weird. There's a whole subject called chess jokes. I don't know if you've ever seen.
Okay, so we might come back to that exact string of discussion in a minute, but I want to explain what he's saying and why I definitely think that he's correct on this. And so what he's saying is that there's two aspects of understanding any system. There is understanding all the possible outcomes, all the possibilities of a system, and the rules of the system that allow for the possibilities. And these are two separate things. And physics fundamentally is supposed to be about the rules of the system. And it's not, in its application in engineering, it's about the possibilities. What can we build? What can we test in scientific experimentation? But so that's something, for an experimentalist, there may be endless experiments. For an engineer, there may be endless possible creations, possible, machines to develop. But for a physicist that's theorist, there is a limit to what can be understood. And that is, once you know all the rules, that's it. You hand it off to the experimentalists, and there's only so many things, though, that they can confirm with experimentation. I mean, you can confirm things over and over and over again with different experiments, but at what point is diminishing returns? And this also goes with engineering, is at what, there is a limit to the amount of useful devices, probably, but there isn't actually a limit to the amount of devices that you can make, probably. And but I definitely agree that physics is about to hit the end. And so with everything, that almost everything, when it comes to understanding, in the context of understanding, it follows an exponential path. I mean, when we think about things like learning ukulele, okay, you go through, you're not just getting better and better every day at this logarithmic rate, okay? You go up and then you might actually start getting sloppy with your technique or something, and your ability actually goes down a little bit. Maybe you just don't practice as much. This is true of everything, not just ukulele, but ukulele is my latest skill that I've been learning, and it's reminded me of all of this. But you might try too many things, and then you end up suffering in your understanding. So you go like this. This is that, graph that you see whenever somebody's trying to explain your learning curve, which is not actually it is a curve. It's not a line. It's you go up and then you go down a little bit, and then you go up and then you go down a little bit, and so it's almost like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but it's not really 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and then 2 steps forward, 1 step back again. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 4 steps forward, 2 steps back, 8 steps forward, 4 steps back, something like that. It's this exponential relationship between advancing and going off path, basically. So, or regressing. Physics has been in a period of regression. And string theory is the heart of that. And it's not that actually there's something wrong with string theory itself, but it's just that there's no linking of the mathematics that they've been working on to reality that you can observe. And if you can't observe it, then it's not physics. Okay, you have to be able to observe it. There's different ways of observing things, especially as we get into the next phase of physics, which I've described as the Entanglement Era. We had a massive leap forward in physics in the first half of the 20th century, which was, the construction of the Standard Model and in quantum field theory, and also, Einstein's advancements and, gravity and general relativity, and all of these things led to advances in nuclear technology as the most primary and probably important example of what the engineering effect is of the physics advancements of the first half of the 20th century. And we have been stuck, though, after this. We've had this huge leap forward where all of a sudden you were able to build a bomb that was scalable to a theoretically infinite size. Okay, a hydrogen bomb or fusion bomb, not a fission bomb, but a hydrogen bomb, which is a fusion bomb, if I'm not mistaken, is theoretically scalable to an infinite size, basically, which is not true of a fission bomb, if I'm correct, and I'm not, an expert, but I have done some research. If you said to somebody in 1910 or 1920 that you could build a bomb that could destroy an entire city, or theoretically a bomb that could destroy an entire world, just theoretically, they wouldn't believe you. And but if you jump forward to 1950, everybody would believe you, because everybody would have seen it. And that is because we had an advancement in the understanding of the rules of physics, and it led to an observation of an enactment of engineering possibilities, essentially. And so we saw the possibilities as the effect of the advancement of the understanding of the rules of physics in the first half of the 20th century, and it allowed for things that seemed impossible. I said recently to some friends of mine that we might be able to pause people's minds. Probably, I really do believe this, in the next 40 years. Probably considerably less time than that. Maybe 20, 30 years from now. That seems impossible now. They laughed at me. They were like, "You've been watching that movie Click too much." But wait, we'll see. I will predict that we probably will be able to pause the information flow in people's minds, or at least mess with it. I've described this next phase in our understanding of rules, of physics rules, or metaphysics rules, whatever you want to call it, as the Entanglement Era, and it is the theory of everything, quote unquote. I hate that term, but it's as close as you're going to get. It's just an overall understanding of the rules, and that leads to, possibilities. Probably endless possibilities. Not endless possibilities that are useful, but probably endless possibilities. And that's what he's discussing. So we've basically been stagnant since, pretty much since the Standard Model and general relativity. And despite the advancement in quote unquote, string theory's advancements, I don't think that these are actually advancements. They have not been able to be contextualized, and that's not an understanding of the rules. You need to know what a Calabi-Yau manifold is. Not what is that the constraints of? What is that the structure of? What is Bott periodicity? Actually, can you point to it? If not, it's not really an advancement. It's just like you realized a math trick, but it's not really a math trick. It's that you just haven't found the context of that math that you deduced. So I agree with him 100%. We're right about to enter what I've called the Entanglement Era, which is an advancement in the understanding of the rules of physics, and it is the final advancement. It's the final one. You do reach a level of skill in anything that is the limit, or it's not skill, it's the rules. You reach a level of rules, and where you cannot go any higher in an understanding of the rules. You can know every single rule in chess. That doesn't mean you've played every single move in chess. That's possible, but you know every single rule of chess, and that is very possible. And it doesn't take that long to learn. There are people that know it. I'm not one of them, so I can't really get too into their chess metaphors. I do hope to later this year relearn. I learned chess when I was very young, but I've forgotten the rules. But I want to relearn it because I think that you'll see a lot of universal concepts in it. But it works for anything. Ukulele included. There's only 4 strings. There's only this, certain number of frets. I don't know how many frets actually. 10, 11, 12, 13, 19 frets, looks like. So 19 frets, 4 strings. And that's your standard model. Okay? And then what can you use that for is like maybe endless. I don't know if it's endless, but it may be endless. We'll get more into what is useful versus not later. But I do agree with him. I think within the next 10 years, we're going to know every rule of physics. Which, that seems crazy to a lot of people. But, like I said, the growth in understanding is exponential to a point until you've reached the limit. Pausing minds seems like something described in claims of alien abduction. Yes, it definitely is something that is described in claims of, experiences with, I don't like the word alien. I don't even like the word ETs. I don't know what to call them. But these beings that the government is observing, those ones, there's definitely claims of mental pausing that have been very consistent across, accounts, I will say. So, next clip that I want to look at is, we already touched on rules and versus consequences, but but this is a clip that is describing of the structure of those rules, essentially. But we'll get into that in a minute.
Isomorphism.
He asked about
Meaning?
he asked about isomorphism and whether or not it was related to meaning. And just for the sake of understanding, isomorphism in modern algebra is one-to-one correspondence mapping between two sets that preserve binary relationships between the elements of the sets. For example, the set of natural numbers can be mapped onto the set of even natural numbers by multiplying each natural number by 2. Okay, what he's about to get into is something I really need to sit and think on more, and I have not had the time to do it, but it's just about symmetry, kind of.
I mean, as I understood it, it was like the deterministic relationship between one pattern and another, something like that.
Well, let's do an isomorphism on your show.
Let's do it.
Okay. What do you think about multiplication versus addition? So, for example, I have the real numbers under addition. There's an identity element. There's an additive inverse. I can take the negative of a number to get another number. So if I add them, I'll get the identity element, which is 0. And I have an operation called addition, right?
Okay.
I have inverses. I've got an addition to combine two objects to get a third. And I've got a particularly distinguished object, which I can add to anything and doesn't change.
Mm-hmm.
Now I notice that under multiplication, that can't be true for the real numbers because 0 has no inverse. 1 over 0 doesn't work. So I say, okay, what if I restrict myself to the positive real numbers and avoid 0 and all the negatives? So is there an operation that keeps me within the positive reals that extends this concept of multiplication? Yeah, I just multiply two positive numbers, I get a third positive number. Positive times positive is positive. Do I have an identity element? Yeah, 1. Under multiplication, 1 is the identity. Do I have an inverse? Sure, I can invert. As long as I get rid of 0, I can take something to the negative first power, and then if I multiply by my original number, I get the multiplicative identity. So that's interesting. I've got positive reals under multiplication. I've got all of the reals under addition that have very similar sounding properties. Then you have a crazy idea. Is that the same thing? Like exactly the same thing? Well, if I take an exponential of a real number, I always get a positive real number.
Mm-hmm.
And if I take the exponential of a plus b, I get the exponential of a times the exponential of b.
Okay. So there's so much there. He didn't even finish getting into it. I highly recommend you watch it, and you can give it your own deep thoughts. But there's so much to this. Once in a discussion that I actually had with Eric on his Instagram Live, we didn't have the time to get into it because I asked him a specific question at the beginning, and that was less related to this question that had popped up throughout the course of his explanation. But basically, I have the clip, but I might play it later. But he had said, he had asked, is there a relationship between addition and multiplication? And I had said, that I thought that multiplication was, or he said there was a dance. There was a particular dance between addition and multiplication. And I had said that I thought that multiplication was the replication of information that was already there, and addition was the adding of information that was not previously there, or the creation of information that wasn't previously there is a better way of putting it that I didn't say, but I said adding. And due to, summing information that was already there. So basically you take two numbers that are already there and you add them and you create a new number, and that is new information that wasn't previously there, that is created by the combination of information that was already there. And if you want to increase the amount of information, I guess you could say, the quantity of information that is already there, then that's multiplication, which is replication. And so in my theory, sentient singularity theory, this is referred to in its physical manifestation as replication and stacking, okay? Or adaptation and ascension in the construct of evolution, essentially. So there's adaptation, which is like, how do you get from how do you have bats and people and dogs and flowers on an organism level, and then or orchids, maybe not just flowers, but a specific type of plant, any type of plant. And then how do you get from a cell to an organism, which is a collection of united cells. And so that would be ascension or stacking or addition. You're adding information that was already there to create something new that wasn't previously there, and then just the adding of the variety of life, you could say, which would be, you could apply this also to the elements. So the elements follow this exact same pattern. There is the creation of new elements, and then there's also the creation of isotopes, which is that would be adaptation. So all the different types of organisms is like it is multiplication in physicality. The physical growth of information in the universe can be observed in the variety of quote-unquote species and subspecies and phenotypes and adaptations in our organisms, and then the different types of cells, and then also different types of elements and certain molecules as well. So then there is moving between certain molecules, the adding of different molecules to form a cell, the adding of different cells to form an organism, the adding of different elements to form a molecule. These are instances of addition, okay? Of new. There's a new addition. Think about it like that. There's a new addition. It's not just multiplication, which is just replication. When you multiply something, think about cells just dividing and multiplying. But a new addition forms when you take those cells and you add them together and you get an organism stacked on top of it. So this is the relationship between addition and multiplication observed in physical reality, and he's describing it though in mathematics, in the numbers, in the real numbers, and in also the operations. So exponentiation and addition and multiplication. And so there are certain instances where we can observe these types of relationships in the context of certain structures. So this is kind of very difficult to talk about, but if you followed along with exactly what he was saying there, good for you. I couldn't. I need to sit with it for more time, but I know what he's discussing because I have sat with the idea for a very long time, and just not in terms of the numbers too much, but I have a little bit. And here's an example of a context in which you can observe the different isomorphic relationships, I guess. And I'm not saying this is the only one, but so many of you on here have have seen this image, basically, which is something that I have just called the binary triality, which is showing that anywhere that you look, if you're looking objectively, you will see a certain structure manifest. And this is true of everything from the colors, the primary and secondary colors, to color mixing types, additive and subtractive color mixing, to the order of operations in mathematics, parentheses, exponentiation, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. And they relate to what I've called the fundamental perspectives, and they are also apparent in the different types of numbers, as Eric was discussing. They are found in your limbs, arms and legs, hands and feet, fingers and toes. There's different symmetric relationships between all of these that can allow for each one to be contextualizing of the other. Okay? Same thing with senses. So that allow you to perceive your eyes and your nose and your ears and your mind, which really what it is, and or your brain, you can maybe call it, your tongue and your skin. And you can see fascinating relationships between these, where you could say your eyes and your nose and your ears are all for the sake of allowing for the perception of things that you perceive as separate from you. But your mind or your brain, which is, or your whatever is allowing you to perceive or feel emotions, and your tongue and your skin is all for the sake of perceiving that which you perceive as directly touching you. So your tongue, to taste something, you have to touch your tongue to it. To feel something with your skin, it has to touch your skin. For something to move your emotions, it has to literally move you, is how we say it. But it's a super literal, as I've said before, phrase. It's something that's both metaphorical and literal. It's beyond both. And the idea of literal and metaphorical are even kind of related to this idea of isomorphism. It's there's a symmetry happening. There's between two views of a single structure, okay, that we don't yet have the terminology to discuss. That's why we need terms like superposition. That's probably the most primary phrase to discuss this concept, but we need more than just that. And like super literal, what is it metaphorical or is it literal? It's super literal. It's both. So you can see this everywhere though. Religion, questions, who, what, where, when, why, how, rocks, vertebrates, the food groups, okay? Once I had a biology professor in college, and he said to me, there's no such thing as a vegetable. And I was like, what are you talking about? There's no such thing as a vegetable. I go get vegetables every week. He's like, there's no such thing as a vegetable. Name a vegetable. And I was like, broccoli. And he was like, it's a stem. I was like, okay, lettuce. And he was like, it's a leaf. And I was like, okay, tomatoes. And he was like, it's a fruit. And it's like, okay, carrots. And he was like, it's a root. I was like, okay, there's no such thing as a vegetable apparently, but there is such a thing as a vegetable. So what's going on? And what it is that when you have the food groups and you've got meat and grains and dairy and vegetables and oils and fruits, these are formed by the perception of our mind of edible, I guess, substances that we need to label, and then our mind will organize, and then we need to label. And so our mind organizes them into different categories. So you get, when you're observing that which is edible, you get vegetables. But when you're just looking at things objectively, yeah, you have fruits, but you don't actually have vegetables, because there's a disconnect between that which we use, the way in which our mind categorizes, or the way in which we have chosen to label the categories that our mind has created when we observe, flora, life that is plants, and then also and the different aspects of it, and then also when we are just looking at things within the context of us eating them, which is, you're looking at edible substances, and that includes flora, but also includes fauna, and is then broken into, different classifications than we use to describe things in biology. Okay, because the context has changed. The context has changed is the redefining of a goal. The goal in one is describing what we can eat, and the goal in the other is to objectively describe, the different aspects of flora, basically, and the different types of flora. But the context has been changed by the goal. And so there is always, though, this structure that we perceive that contextualizes and categorizes and that organizes categories into a hierarchy and into isomorphic relationships that are symmetric in some way, shape, or form, and that are contextualizing of the rest. Okay, it's very complicated and difficult to discuss because, like I've said, we don't really have the right terms for this. You look up isomorphism and you get something about algebra, but what you're not getting is, and this is one of Eric's examples that I've heard that he said to me in that discussion that we had that I mentioned earlier, is he was like, you have sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and I think umami, and sweet, sour, salty, bitter. And then there would be like, I don't know, two more probably, which would be maybe heat, like spiciness, and umami, which is like savoriness almost. And substantive is like kind of the weird way in which we perceive it. But and he was like, what is the relationships between these? Why is it that sweet and sour tastes good, but if you just did something that was, I don't know, salty and bitter, that's not necessarily something that sounds appetizing. But why? Okay, because there is a structure, a pattern in which these various categories that we have labeled and perceived relate to each other. And that structure of relationships is basically isomorphism. But we don't think about it in terms of the way in which Eric was trying to explain, with the different ways in which we can taste things, the different flavors, and then also with me and your senses. Okay, there is a hierarchy of the senses where you've got which is a hierarchy of trust. So what you see, what you smell, what you hear, what you taste, what you feel physically, what you feel emotionally. There's a hierarchy to these. There's also a relationship where they all sum to one, which is the feelings. What you see, smell, taste, touch, and here all sum to how you feel, okay? But there's also a hierarchy of that which you see, you trust over that which you smell, and that which you smell you trust over that which you hear, kind of. And you can test this by thinking about things like, let's say you take a bite of something and it looks disgusting. Let's say it's, I don't know, lava cake that's been mixed up, okay, and it looks like shit. And you take a bite of it, though, and all of a sudden, that which you tasted supersedes that which you're seeing, okay? So the disgust that you feel when you look at it has been trumped by the pleasure that you feel when you taste it. And this is how you basically are able to deduce the relationships between these various categories that are everywhere. And I believe that this is what the Calabi-Yau manifold is. I'm not exactly positive, but it's just a theory. And but it's the structure of information processing. Okay? It's the structure of mind organizes these categories in order to make sense of them. And they're all contextualizing of each other. There are symmetries between them. And, there's also a hierarchy. When you look at the Abrahamic faiths, okay, and there's a triality of them. There's like Judaism, Christianity, Islam. And and just in the way in which they manifest, there is an obvious increase of force from each one of these. You have a theological tradition like Judaism does not proselytize. You have Christianity, which is supposed to proselytize, but not be spread through absolute force, which is violence. And then you have Islam, which it says, yes, it's not supposed to be spread through violence, but in how it is enacted in the world, it does spread through violence. Christianity is supposed to be communicated basically verbally. You're supposed to spread the good news. These are levels of force in which they are inflicting on the world. Okay? And yet there's also this symmetrical relationship between them, where you look at Judaism and Islam, and they are almost mirror images of each other. They are mirror images of each other. I mean, the Hadiths is the Talmud, and it's, when you look into the scriptures and you see what it says, even for the golem in Judaism, which is the artificial quote unquote general intelligence, which is just technological intelligence. It has truth written on its forehead, and then you look in Islam and you have the Dajjal, which is the exact same thing, which is also the Antichrist in Christianity, and it has liar written on its forehead, which is, it's like two things are looking at themselves in the mirror, where everything is the same but reversed. This is found throughout Judaism and Islam's relationship. But they're all reflecting across Christianity, because Christianity is almost the dividing line between the two. And not just in a timeline type of way, but in a chronological way, but also in their belief systems. And when you look into what their opinions are of Jesus, and it's a dividing line almost, not really, but kind of. It appears that way in how it manifests, and you have a symmetry. Okay, you have mirrors looking at each other. So, and you have Islam, which is very much about it's very much about proselytization. It is a proselytizing religion, and it is an enforced religion, even though it's not supposed to be quote unquote according to actual scripture. That's not the point. The way in which it is perceived and the way in which it manifests, it is a proselytizing religion, which it is supposed to be, and it is an enforced religion. where it takes, hold as the dominant viewpoint. And then you have Judaism, which just is not proselytizing, and wherever it takes hold as the dominant viewpoint, which is very few places in the world, but wherever those places tend to be, it tends to result in a secular society, because there isn't that enforcement of viewpoint. So, for the most part. Now, there's little instances of, you can pick this apart a bit, but if you understand the Abrahamic theological traditions to any, significant degree, you know what I'm talking about. But this is also true of colors and color mixing and, like I said, the senses and the mathematical order of operations. What's interesting is what Eric was describing when he's relating it to different numbers, is that it always seemed to go positive almost. It's like any operation ended up positive. Nothing went to negative numbers. And in those relationships, from what I understood, I need to go back and look to be positive of that. But that actually makes a lot of sense, because there is only growth and decay, but decay doesn't result in negative negative information objectively. It just results in less information, but there is no negative information objectively. Okay, there's only somethingness. There isn't nothingness minus, there isn't something less than nothing. There's only nothing and something. You can increase the amount of somethings and the two aspects of something, which is, the depth and the width, which is like the amount, and also the position, which is are you above or below in the hierarchy, and which takes place of objectively. It's like an organism is higher in the hierarchy than the cells because it's composed of cells. Cells exist within it, and then that means that the environment of a cell is an organism. Okay, so the organism determines and has power over the environment of a cell. That is why it's dominant over cells. Cells are dominant over molecules because they control the environment in which molecules replicate in the periodicity of sentience. So there is a hierarchical relationship between every objective category, and then there's also a symmetric relationship between objective categories. And this is because your mind needs to organize things into a hierarchy always, and also differentiate things as well. And what that hierarchy that it organizes into is, it can be a hierarchy of trust, basically. So, like, you trust your eyes over your ears. If you hear something that sounds scary, but then you see something that's making the sound, it's not scary, then you will trust your eyes. Okay, the feeling that is then generated is going to be from your eyes, but it's higher in the hierarchy of trust. But then there's also, organizing things into, I don't want to say chronological order, but basically chronological order, into the order of operations. What comes first in order for the next thing to come? Organizing things into the order in which they must manifest in order to manifest at all. So you cannot get, if you're looking at the Fibonacci sequence, you cannot get, it's 3 before you have 2, and you cannot have 2 before you have 1 and 1. So you go 1 and 1, and then 2, and then 5, actually. No, it's 3. It is 3. Yeah, it's 3. I think. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5. Yeah. Okay. You get what I'm saying. you can't drive a car until you put gas in the car if there was no gas in the car. So there's an order in which you have to do things in order for them to get to where you want, basically. In order to achieve your goal, you have to organize things into in chronological order. I don't think that's the right word, but I'll continue to think about it. But then there's also a hierarchy of trust, of information that you are taking in. So what information trumps other information if there's a conflict, and then also the differentiation that occurs between categories that contextualize the other. So black and white. These are two opposites, but they also contextualize each other. Darkness and light, okay, or brightness. Darkness and brightness. Sweet and sour, and salty and bitter. These are also kind of opposites. But you can do opposite in two ways, because you can say that, you could say parentheses and addition are opposites, but you could also say, because they're reflecting across multiplication, no, that's not a good way to do it. It'd probably be like, you could say multiplication and addition are opposites, but then you could also say addition and subtraction are opposites. Okay, so it goes, there's two ways of symmetry there, which basically sums to like a fourfold structure, which is at the heart of all reality, as I've said before. And it's not just, that's apparent in space-time and Sentient Singularity Theory, geometric unity, Garrett Lacey's E8 theory, exceptionally simple theory of everything, constructor theory. They all have at their heart a fourfold structure, which is a structure of symmetric relationships. Like in Sentient Singularity Theory, you have inside and outside and separate and oneness. These are the four primary perspectives that form the backbone of the theory. Inside and outside are symmetric relationships that define each other. And they cannot exist without each other. You cannot have something that is outside without understanding that which is inside. You cannot perceive outsideness without perceiving insideness, or having a concept of insideness without having a concept of outsideness. Or you cannot have a perception of the concept of oneness without having the concept of the perception of separateness. Kind of. That one's a little bit difficult because we can't. But sentient existence can have the concept of oneness without the concept of separateness. Kind of, maybe. It's hard to know, because at one point there was just oneness, and now there is multiplicity, and of what? Sentience. And how could you even? There is an order that it takes place in order to perceive originally, you could say, God's first perception or conceptualization of separateness. He had to perceive his oneness first. So there is this. These relationships are present always, at least within our ability to conceive of, and it's everywhere. And this concept of isomorphism is not just one that is restricted to abstract mathematics and algebra class. It is something that can be observed everywhere that you make an observation, if you're looking at that which you're observing from an objective viewpoint. And when you do that, you'll see the exact same structure every time, and the isomorphic relationships within that structure. And we'll get more into how do you definitely know that you're looking at something objectively, but later on in the episode. But this is very difficult, and I don't want to rant too long on it, but I hope that made some sense. Let's see the questions. seems like the majority of human advancement has happened in the last 70 years, maybe less. Yes. Probably about like 200 years. But I mean, yes, the majority has happened in the last 70 years, but 200 years, or at least 100 years, we've had a massive amount of advancement. We think it's like the last 70 years, but it's actually probably closer to the last 100, but that's because time is flying for everybody right now in society. And, you don't think of the 80s as 40 years ago, but they were, it's crazy. I'm 30 years old. The 90s were 30 years ago. That's wild. I think that the accounts have been prolific and consistent throughout human history. Only the names have changed. Yeah, the language is definitely not precise enough on so many things. Vegetables is very generic. Stems of plants have their own categories. Yeah, exactly. But vegetables still is a category that we understand for some reason, and I still cannot pin down exactly what it is that we understand as a vegetable. I can't. But I do understand that we understand what it means for some. When we hear vegetable, there's some type of intrinsic understanding of what we're discussing. But it's like plants that don't taste as good as fruits. Almost. But any aspect of a plant that's not the fruit, I don't know. It's interesting. But even then, we think of some fruits as vegetables, which is like, tomatoes and beans, things like that. We don't think about all of these things as fruits. Peppers, even though we know they're fruits, your mind is like, well, that shouldn't be a fruit. It's almost like if it's not sweet and it's not the fruit and it's not sweet, then it's a vegetable. And there's even a categorization to that, because it's almost like if it's not a fruit and it's not sweet, instead of if it's not sweet and it's not a fruit, instead of if it's not a fruit and it's not sweet. It's like if the stem of something was sweet, we would not think of it as a vegetable. But if the fruit of something is sweet, we think about it as a fruit. But if it's not sweet, then we think about it as a vegetable, even if it is the fruit of something. So there is this weird order that takes place that our mind uses to categorize vegetables. And you can the only way to really perceive it and pin it down is to sit with yourself and think about all these different, instances of observation and start organizing them and writing them down. It's a very personal exercise. It's not something that is, something you just measure in a lab very easily. But it's like doing mathematics. You could just sit and just do mathematics. But you can also sit and do mathematics, quote unquote, with like the observed reality as well. You think about rocks, and you have platonic and clastic and foliated, and then you have igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic. So you have platonic igneous, clastic sedimentary, foliated metamorphic. Then you have volcanic igneous, chemical sedimentary, non-foliated metamorphic. And a rock has to go first be an igneous, and then be sedimentary, and then be metamorphic. It can't be you can't just jump straight to metamorphic from igneous. You have to go metamorphic, sedimentary. You have to go igneous, sedimentary, metamorphic. So igneous is like granite, sedimentary is like limestone. I think this has been since 7th grade since I've done this, so bear with me and forgive the mistakes. But then you have metamorphic, which would I can't think of the name of any of them, but it's like, I don't know, fossils maybe. I'd have to look. But there's an order to it. It's an order of operations. The order of operations extends beyond just PEMDAS. That's my point. And it's all, that structure is the structure of isomorphism. Okay, that's as good as I'm going to do for now. Moving on, because we can't be too long. But here's a important example of this.
We encounter the same structure fundamentally in different guises.
Mm-hmm.
Different guises, he said.
And so it's about stripping off the artifice of the presentation and saying, are these things simply different? Like, Clark Kent isn't Superman, but there is a being in that universe that has two different instantiations, one of which is called Clark Kent and one of which is called Superman, that aren't apparently obvious to the residents of this comic universe because they never figure out that, it's like the famous line, have you ever noticed that you never see Clark Kent and Superman in the same place at the same time? So that sort of stripping away the ways in which things are presented to understand the underlying reality. I'll give you another very simple one. The number of ways that let's say a crystal sculpture, if you've ever seen where they fret.
Yeah, he's going to get into something that's going to take a lot more time to digest than we have. But I suggest you watch it. He talks about putting a cube inside of a box and how many different orientations can you put that cube in, which is 6. And then there's also basically he talks about how the perception of basically 4-ness comes into play, which is like a quadratic perception of a cube. When you think of a cube, you think of 4, even though it's really 6. So there's 6 sides to it, but there's also it's that 6 is in a relationship with a 4, okay, and there's a relationship there. But basically, this isomorphic relationship can be observed in any kind of superposition structure. So one and many, you can never see oneness and multiplicity at the same time, but they're actually two perspectives of one being. And I love that he used the word being, because it is a sentient being. That doesn't mean he thinks it's a sentient being. I'm saying it's a sentient being, but it almost doesn't make sense for you to call it something that's not a being, because things that aren't beings that we understand don't always have the same type of superposition structure to them. So where you say one and many, it's like, is a chair one and many? What do you mean one and many? But a sentient being can be one and many at the same time, because you are a sentient being and so is every cell in your body, and you and your cells are one. So there's this one and many structure that can be observed, but you can only perceive one side of that at a time. Just like a coin, you can only see heads or tails one side at a time. You can't see both sides of the coin at the same time. It's impossible. Try it. You'd have to do tricks of like mirrors and stuff like that, but you can't just hold it up and look at it. So is a quarter heads or tails? It's like, well, have you ever noticed that you never see heads and tails in the same room together? Because heads is Superman and tails is Clark Kent. And then the reality is that they're two sides of one being. What being? Sentient being. that being. But you can see this with humor and horror when you're looking at things objectively. They're two sides of one coin. And there's always an order to this as well, though. So heads comes before tails, but they're also simultaneous in their manifestation, but they are ordered in their... operation, I guess. It's tough to think about. This is the chicken or the egg idea. It's like, it's not just a matter of they are simultaneous. Okay, a chicken and an egg exist simultaneously. You cannot have chickens and exist without eggs. Okay, or at least you cannot have chickens persist without eggs simultaneously with chickens. But there's also this order to it where a chicken lays the egg hatches into a chicken, and you'll say, well, but you can look at it and say, well, the egg can come before the chicken, or the chicken can come before the egg. The reality is that the chicken comes before the egg, and you can tell this because the chicken is the change space, and the egg is not. There's no change happening for an egg, for the most part. Like, there's no environmental impacts that are then going to be, represented in the differences that are inflicted on the lineage of a chicken. Okay, how do you get from a T-Rex to a chicken? Because things happen while it's a chicken or a T-Rex, or it's in between. It's in a state of change, almost. But it's tough because it's actually that interplay between the chicken and the egg where the real change takes place, in the being itself. But the impacts on it take place while it's a chicken, and for the most part. And this is, like I said, this is difficult, but there is an ordered, there is order or directionality. This is the perfect way to put it. There is directionality and simultaneity to existence. You look at a clock and you say that 2 p.m. Comes before 4 p.m., but the clock, like all of the hours on the clock itself, I'm not talking about like in the day, but on the clock itself, all exist simultaneously, but there is an ordered directionality to when they are being instantiated or manifesting, I guess, when they are being. And this is difficult because, and like I said, give yourself grace, give me grace, give Eric grace, give Robert Breedlove grace, give everybody grace who's trying to talk about this stuff, because we don't yet have the correct vocabulary to do it. We're building it now. So it's tough. We don't think about superposition in any kind of meaningful way. We just think about it in quantum physics, and it's outside of context in the way that we think about it in quantum physics. But so here, but if you're gonna, when we're talking about like what is an objective view of things, okay? And I said earlier I would describe like when in examples of an objective view versus subjective view, and Eric and Robert start talking about this in the next clip, and then I'm going to give an example that actually is this the solution to the problem that they're discussing, kind of.
Is it important that Yingwei Malmsteen can play faster than other people? Well, it depends. If females are conducting a competition for mates, which is something that happens in some species and not others, they tend not to want a bunch of creative entries because they can't tell, well, who's better than who else. So, for example, bowerbirds collect the rarest color in some subspecies, which is blue. Blue is very rare in the environment. So you decide that you're going to hold a scavenger hunt for the color blue. Is blue meaningful? No. Is the scarcity of blue meaningful? Yes, because it gives you one competition. What if one guy was collecting red and another guy was collecting blue? And then you'd say, I don't know who's better. How am I going to make a decision? But if you can get everybody to want the same thing, like, the whole question about, well, he has 12 houses, but this other guy had 17 houses, so I married the guy with 17 houses. Well, did you really need, you couldn't get by with 12 houses? Oh, no, no, no. I just wanted to know the relative quality of the mates. 17 is bigger than 12. Ergo, I'm using that as a proxy. I don't even need more than one house.
Right.
Okay. So the house example is great because it really shows, it gives us the context by which to understand objectivity very well. And because there's three levels to this, where there's subjectivity, then there is objectivity, and then there is this weird zone in between in which we attempt to bring universality to subjectivity and provide like objectivity, but it's not actually objectivity, and I'll explain why. And so basically, let's say you have somebody asks you, is that a big house? You're like, well, in comparison to what? My grandpa's shed, comparison to that, it's a huge house. But if you said in comparison to Buckingham Palace, it's nothing. It's a shack, I was going to say, but it's a very small house. And this is relativity, okay, where the definition is floating, okay, basically. So is a Toyota Corolla a fast car? Comparison to what? Trying to think of a slow car, but Model Ts went like 100 miles an hour. But it's in comparison to, a golf cart, or in comparison to, a Ferrari. Okay, so in comparison to a Ferrari, Toyota Corolla is not a fast car. In comparison to a go-kart, it's very, very fast. So the definition is floating, and it is contextualized dependent upon that which you're comparing it to. Okay? Then we attempt to bring universality to this by applying a universal metric. But what the problem is that it destroys the context. Okay, so you say, is that a big house? You say, well, it's 5,000 square feet. Well, is that a big house? I don't know, but it's 5,000 square feet. Is that a fast car? It goes 200 miles an hour. Is that a fast car? I don't know, but it goes 200 miles an hour. Okay, so you've just removed yourself from context of even the question. Okay, there's no question being answered that actually has any meaning. There is no meaning behind a metric. The metric allows you to relate one thing to another. So you could say, is a Ferrari a fast car? Well, it goes 200 miles an hour. Is a fast car compared to a Toyota Corolla? Well, the Toyota Corolla goes 150 miles an hour, and the Ferrari goes 250 miles an hour. Okay, so now you're able to deduce that the Ferrari is a fast car in comparison to a Toyota Corolla. It gives you a metric to measure the aspect that you need to in order to contextualize it and answer whatever question you have, okay? But then there's objectivity. And objectivity is defined by objective goals, because goals are that which contextualizes, and this is something that that Sentient Singularity Theory, but also constructor theory are very in tune with, I guess you could say, and that is goals being defining, okay, of your entire understanding. Like I said, vegetables only exist if your goal is to organize your food, but they don't exist in biological classification of the aspects of flora. They just don't. And so you say, well, what is the purpose of a house objectively? Not a proxy purpose. Like a proxy purpose is like in the example that Eric was giving, where women are judging men's fitness of, resource providing by the size of the house that they are able to provide, even though they don't need, you don't need 5 houses, but if a guy can provide you 5 houses instead of 1 house, the guy that can provide 5 houses is seen as being able to, be providing of more. But that is a proxy, or it's a correlative relationship to the ultimate goal. And the ultimate goal is, what is the purpose of a house? Not as a substitute, but as an objective resource. It is to live in. Okay, so I've thought a lot about this, and the answer to the question of is that a big house is answered by, are there more bedrooms than the amount of people who live in the house, essentially. So if you, usually married couple shares a bedroom, but some people don't actually during certain times, like Orthodox Jews, and don't a lot of times will have separate beds or separate houses, not separate houses, separate bedrooms during menstruation, and it just depends on the family, but it doesn't matter. But what matters is that the goal of a house, objectively, is to be a shelter for people to live in and to sleep in, really, essentially, more than anything else. It's the place in which you go to retire, not to necessarily to work always, sometimes, but objectively, it's so that you have a roof over your head to sleep. Your bedroom, the number of bedrooms, if there are more bedrooms in the house than there are people who live in the house, it's a big house. It's bigger because it provides more than the objective goal requires of it, essentially. Okay? And if it doesn't have as many bedrooms as the amount of people that live in the house, then it is a small house, objectively. That is the objective way of measuring whether or not a house is big or small. It doesn't matter about square feet, and it doesn't matter whether or not it's bigger than Buckingham Palace or smaller than a shack, or bigger than a shack or smaller than Buckingham Palace. What matters, if you're going to look at things objectively, is you have to find the objective goal of a house, which is, why do houses even exist? To be a shelter to, retire in, to sleep in. And therefore, that is the context by which you judge whether or not a house is big or small. Does it have enough to fulfill that requirement, its defining requirement to the people who would actually be using it? And this is how you do it. You can do this with cars. Is it a fast car? Well, is it fast enough to get you from where you need to, from where you are to where you need to be, and in the amount of time that would be required in order for you to actually, get to where you would need to be, basically. Which, that's tough, because when you it's different than a house almost, because you can adjust when you start driving, but the real question is is it fast enough? It's is it, well, it doesn't move. Is it, or you could almost say, is a car fast? It would be really, if you wanted to judge it in comparison to non-powered travel. So if it allows you to get somewhere faster than you could run, then it's probably a fast car. Or not a fast car, but it's it's a fast enough car. Instead of a big enough house, it's a fast enough car. Okay? And we just don't think about cars like that, so it almost doesn't make sense, but it does as a metaphor. It's just not a very good one, because it doesn't make sense. But the house one does. It's very good. It's very obvious what I'm saying there. Is, if you don't have enough bedrooms for everybody that lives in the house, it's a small house. But if you have enough bedrooms for everybody that lives in the house, it's big enough. And if you have more than bedrooms than amount of people that live in the house, it's a big house. It's not just big enough. We don't really have a word for that's singular for that meeting of a goal. It's enough, but big enough. We have to add big enough, fast enough, small enough. So But that is what I mean by objectivity, and it is always related to a goal. And we're so used to proxies and correlative analogies and things like that are not actually objectively defining or objectively defined. And we need to seek that which is objectively defined, and you need to know how to do that, which starts with what is the goal for something's existence. And then whatever the answer is to a question of, is it big enough, is it fast enough, is it small enough, is it powerful enough, whatever. It is going to be related to the purpose for which something exists. So the purpose of a house existence is for people to live in it and sleep in it at night. But it's not. That is also how you define a valuable house. It's like, does it have the ability to meet those needs? Does it have a separate room for each person that's going to sleep in it? Is also how you define its value, not just its and it it's not just its like its monetary value, which is, like I described earlier, it's like square foot. It's the metric that we use to universalize our contextualization of relativistic relationships, which is not objectivity. It's not. So and this applies to everything, politics, physics, everything, but we'll get more into it later. But that house example is the best example that I can think of. It's very important to understand this. So there's a point in this actually where Eric is saying how, I'll just play it. We might go a little bit long because like I said, this is the first episode of this structure of this content, and we've maintained being on task though, which is good. So even if it goes a bit long, that's okay.
Yeah, although again, it's funny, we've taught everyone that correlation does not imply causation, so that they reflexively recite it, and therefore nothing implies causation.
Yeah.
So, my counter argument, which they don't like, is, yeah, it usually does. That doesn't mean it always does. It just means that all of you guys have been taught to recite that like your Stepford wives. Correlation does not imply causation. Oh, do I get a cookie? Do I get a fish? Do I get some good thing?
Mimesis, once again.
Gosh, we are going to talk later about the horrendous impact of our quote-unquote education system on the destruction of our ability to even know what it is to think. And that is a very relevant idea to that. It's a perfect example. Correlation does not equal causation. And I love what Eric said. It's great. Usually does. That's a fact. We use it to look to identify patterns. And if correlation didn't usually equal causation, or was not usually related to the causative factor, we wouldn't even look for correlation. So we wouldn't look for patterns in any kind of correlative capacity. So yeah, it usually does. But or at least it shows you the path by which to go down of your focus, basically. So it just shows you where to look. That's what it does. A vegetable would be a fruit that is not sweet. No. When I was a kid, they used to play music from the 50s and 40s on the radio, maybe older. Yes. Our language is definitely not precise enough. I don't know what was the context of that comment about the music. But I mean, probably when I said I can't believe that the 90s was 30 years ago, but it is wild how time flies. Like I said before, guys, please hit the like button, share this. We're not done yet, but if you're watching and you find this valuable, hit the like button and subscribe. One day I will figure out a way to say that without sounding like a cheap salesman. But until then, I will sound like a cheap salesman. Okay, next. Clip. This is going to be great to discuss. Like I said, I recommend looking at these streams and watching the entire stream, the entire video that I am providing commentary on, so that you know the exact context of every clip that I am pulling up. Now, I'm doing my best to not pull anything out of context, but I'm also not, perfect. And I will do my best to interpret what people mean by what they say. And if I ever make a mistake, then I apologize to whoever I'm, took out of context or misunderstood. But like I said, I won't show you a stream. We will not provide commentary on a stream that isn't worth watching. My goal is not to be a critic. It's usually to show good videos and pieces of content that I think are valuable, not the ones that I think are useless. Why would I focus on that at all? So.
You mentioned these 4 terms, truth, meaning, fitness, grace. We went down the rabbit hole of meaning, which was a very interesting and enlightening discussion. But what I would now like to ask you about is grace. How do we define grace? How does it fit into that 4-term model that you laid out?
Interesting question. I mean, if let's just we were talking about The Godfather earlier. Grace is something that Michael Corleone tends to see drained out of his life. You're watching the transformation of a person who's kind of a straight arrow coming from a corrupt family. He's gone to college, he's served in the army, he's fought with valor, he's got a wonderful girlfriend. He's not his family. But then as he understands the calculus of survival, that is fitness, and the meaning and importance of truth, and the meaning of family and all of these things, he ends up killing his sister's husband. He ends up killing his own brother. He's engaged in, killing very close associates of his, if there's any whiff of betrayal. And it's this quality that's sort of difficult to sort of pin down if you're not a religious person. But it's kind of a sort of, if somebody gave you an opportunity to advance your fitness, to follow the truth, and that your life would continue to have meaning, but you'd be a son of a bitch if you actually just went down that path. You have to ask yourself, is it worth it to do things that are really not graceful, even if there's a lot of reason to do them?
So is this related to morality versus practicality? The tension between the two?
The interesting thing is that morality and ethics stem out of a competitive need to defeat other groups. So
yes.
Okay. So basically, I've come up with a label for these 4 properties that Eric has outlined here, and which is truth, meaning, fitness, and grace. And I I was calling them the 4 priorities, the 4 primary priorities. Okay, and this is such a great label for this. I'm not trying to steal his terms. These are his terms. He outlined them, and I think very rightly so. But in Sentient Singularity Theory, there is the most objective perspective of the most objective perspectives are the 4 primary perspectives, and they are the foundation of Sentient Singularity Theory. And so if we're going to look at them, here you have them. And they are oneness and separate and outside and inside. So you can perceive oneness, you can perceive outside, you can perceive inside, you can perceive separateness. And there is a relationship between them, and they are defining of each other. Oneness is outside and inside of separateness. Outside is separate from oneness. Separate is inside or outside of oneness. Inside is separate and oneness. So there is a relationship that you can, where when you understand them, you can understand that they are entangled to such a degree that they are defining of each other, and they all must exist simultaneously, or else none of them exist. If you cannot perceive oneness, then you cannot perceive separateness. If you cannot perceive oneness and separateness, then you cannot perceive outside and inside, because inside and outside of what? Where's the boundaries? Okay? Here's your relationships. Here's your boundaries. And you can do this with all kinds of aspects of your life. So, but these, I think a great label for them would be the 4 primary priorities. This is very, very, very important. This is one of the most important parts, if not the most important part of the stream that I'm showing tonight. And these 4 priorities would be truth, meaning, meaning, I'm trying to show what the relationships would be. So, and basically, we're not going to get too into it, but we'll see what we can do real quick. But you have truth, and you have meaning, and you have fitness, and you have grace. And fitness is basically survival of the fittest, and it's pure merit. Okay, and then you have grace, which is it's like the opposite of fitness, in the same way that inside and outside are kind of seem to be opposites of each other, but there's an isomorphic relationship, maybe. So they appear to be opposites, but they're actually not. They're only opposites subjectively. Objectively, there's not only no conflict between truth, grace, meaning, and fitness in objectivity, but the objective perspective of priorities in life, they are entangled and dependent on each other. You cannot have grace or truth or fitness or meaning from the objective perspective without all of those being fulfilled simultaneously. It just seems like in certain circumstances they're not. And so here's an instance that I was thinking about, is that, there was a stream once that Eric Weinstein was discussing how he he was like, he was saddened by the disparity in chess statistics between men and women. He was like, it hurts me to look at, how many, of the top 500 chess players in the world are women, but I can't argue with them. They're there. And this is an instance of the perception of fitness, okay? Like, who is fit to be a chess player objectively? You could say, well, I know a woman that's better than most men, but do you know any women that are in the top 500 chess players in the world that could go up against them? No. I think it's like 2 of them or something. Only 2 women in the top 500 or something. Almost none are 2 of the chess players, of the top 500 chess players are women, something ridiculous like that. It's like in the single digits. And that may seem, it seems like, from a fitness perspective, only men are fit to be chess players, because there's no woman that comes close to even the top 100 chess players in the world, I don't think. And we've discussed why that is. It's not because of IQ or intelligence or anything like that. It is because men are able to emotionally detach themselves or are emotionally detached in such a way that it allows them to look at things objectively and plan strategically in an objective capacity, whereas women are emotionally entangled with their circumstances always, and it doesn't allow them to detach and plan objectively, strategically objectively from an objective standpoint. So it's not a bad thing, but it is universal, and but it seems like there's this lack of meaning to this, because you'll see this a lot. It's like, when people say men are stronger than women, and people will be upset by this. But that's because there's a lack of meaning. It's like, why are men stronger than women? Is it so that they can, win in arm wrestle competitions against women? No, that's not true at all. But in an objective meaning capacity, men are stronger than women for the sake of women. Okay? And it is to make up for something that they are lacking, because if they had that quality which is necessary to, be physically strong, it would counter some ability that they have for the sake of us. And so when we look at chess statistics and we say, well, men are just better than women at chess, and it makes people upset, and that's because you're not being objective in your presentation of what's happening here. And that's also because chess is not actually objectively meaningful. It's a proxy for an objectively meaningful ability, which is strategic thinking. Okay, it's a proxy for strategic thinking and basically in accomplishing a goal. And when you contextualize it objectively and you say men and women aren't even able to exist without each other, and you realize that the strategic ability of men is for the sake of women, now you have meaning, and you have fitness, and you have grace, because you have there's this intrinsic forgiveness for an apparent lack that is perceived, but it's not. Grace isn't the best word for it, and that's because, and Eric outlines this. He's like, we need, later on in the video that I showed, he said we need an idea or concept of grace that is detached from Jesus and or an Abrahamic God or something like that. And we really struggle with this as secularists, is what he said. And the reality is that secularists, true secularists that are not just secularists, I don't even know what that means, but anti-theists, okay? Anti-theists, not the atheists, that doesn't actually exist. An anti-theist, people who believe that existence is not sentient. It's not a singular sentient being. That's what an anti-theist is. Don't just have trouble with grace. And the reason why they do have trouble with grace, though, is because grace is kind of like perceived as like forgiveness, and nature, when you're just thinking about like nature, you're like, well, nature is survival of the fittest. It's, it's a concrete jungle out there. And, if you don't undermine your coworkers or something, then, that's how you climb the corporate ladder if you do that. It is actually the incorrect perspective of nature. But when we think about nature like that, we're thinking about it as not this sentient being that's making choices and looking at you and empathizing with you and understanding you. It's just a constraint of rules that you exist in that are dispassionate. And that's not actually reality. It's a subjective perspective, but it's not objective reality. And that you have trouble with meaning, though, too, when you are an anti-theist, because you can't come up with an objective meaning definition to meaning. So what is meaningful to the highest being in the hierarchy? There is no highest being in the hierarchy if you're an anti-theist. It's just like you're just back to quote-unquote survival of the fittest. But the problem is that absolute survival of the fittest run for a long enough time, or for enough cycles, I guess you could say, of events, ends up eating itself. Okay? A lion that is so good that if lions were so good that no wildebeest escaped, it would destroy the entire system. Okay? And this, all of these priorities of truth and grace and meaning and fitness, they are all existent in a way in which they are so entangled that they are dependent upon each other for each other's own existence. You cannot have truth without grace, fitness, and meaning. You cannot have grace without meaning, truth, and fitness. You cannot have fitness without truth, grace, and meaning. Okay? And grace and fitness have this mirrored relationship, and truth and meaning also do too. But it's different, because you have truth, which is oneness, and which is the highest perspective of reality, which is that it's one. And then you can't say you have multiple realities. It doesn't make sense, because if there's multiple realities, then they're just two components of one reality. It is defined by the definition itself. It's self-referential. And then you have meaning. Meaning comes from the understanding that existence is a sentient being that has the highest perspective, truest perspective, and that context leads to the understanding of choice. And this is all in Sentient Singularity Theory, which we will be doing a presentation on later this month, once the paper comes out, which will be before the end of the month. But when you realize that the highest being, whose perspective is the truest of them all, chose to make you, it provides meaning to you. And if you have meaning, then everything that you do has meaning. Every one that you create, every one that you protect, every one that you provide for, and that you enable and that you hurt, they all have meaning, which means everything that you do to impact them has meaning. And grace comes from, true understanding of grace comes from the perception of allowing for sentient beings to, make mistakes, essentially, or to be forgiven. And a dispassionate, disconnected, non-sentient system that is, purely material in nature with no sentient aspect to it, cannot forgive anyone. It doesn't take you into account. Okay? In order to receive grace, you have to be taken into account by someone that is in a position to give you grace. Okay? There's lots of subjective instances where that's possible. You giving me grace for failing to have the right words and stumbling over, what I'm trying to say. In this, you are in the position to give me grace. But you would only do so because you have an understanding that I'm a sentient being, and you understand yourself as a sentient being. And objective grace only comes from being with an objective perspective higher than you in a hierarchy. And, like a company, it's like grace comes, objective grace comes from, forgiveness by the person who is in a position to judge you. And it's a choice. It's always a choice. It's meaningless if it's not a choice. It can't exist if it's not a choice, which is why secularists have such a problem with grace. But it's not just that they have a problem with grace. They have a problem with everything on this list. It's just very obvious when trying to conceptualize grace. And it's also because it's so associated with a theological perspective. But fitness as well. So if you say, and here's to relate to what Eric was getting to next, he said that ethics start with, and I don't want to say morals, because morals are more like a universal almost, but ethics, if they're different, then they're more subjective, and they start with the hierarchy of the organization of the hierarchy in which you apply these various, or you prioritize these various priorities. So in certain circumstances, you prioritize fitness. In certain circumstances, you prioritize grace. In certain circumstances, you prioritize meaning, and or in certain circumstances, you prioritize truth. And that always comes from this recognition of an inside-outside perspective. Okay, so you prioritize that which is inside over that which is outside. And so the four primary perspectives are very relevant to these four primary priorities that Eric is discussing. And because you give you're more likely to forgive your family than you are to forgive your coworker. You're more likely to forgive your coworker than you are to forgive, some guy who you've never met, and or who you have no relationship with that you are aware of. And your family is more meaningful to you than your community members, and the other members of your community are more meaningful to you than people who are still people but outside of your community, and people are still more meaningful to you than plants or cows. Okay, so this helps you understand the morals of the and ethics, which I don't like the word ethics, morals involved with when it comes to like eating food. It's like how can you kill that chicken? Well, because me and my survival and the survival of those people that I feed with that chicken, they're more meaningful than that chicken. Okay? And you can't organize that hierarchy logically without understanding that like the context in which you you boost one of these four priorities higher than the rest in a subjective instance. But in objectivity, they are all equal, kind of. Because oneness is the highest, then separateness, and then inside, and then outside, okay, in a priority. So you would say truth is the highest priority, then meaning, and so you could say the truth is sentience. Meaning comes from other sentiences, so separateness. And you can't argue with that, really. Like, what is the most meaningful thing that you can think of? It's like, your family or something like that. It's separate sentiences, but they're always sentiences. If you're somebody that says, what's more meaningful, your children or your cars? It's like, if you choose your cars, you're wrong. You can't just say, well, it's a matter of perspective. It's not a matter of perspective. There is one perspective from the very top, and you have to look at things from that perspective in order to objectively, truthfully contextualize the reality of these priorities. So your children are more meaningful than your cars. Why? Because they're sentient beings. And that the truth is sentient, and that is how it gives the context to meaning. And it also gives context to grace, and it gives context to fitness. So this is why, like I said, non-religious people, quote unquote, I hate the word religion, but anti-theists have way more trouble with this than theists. And most anti-theists, or atheists as they will call themselves, but it's really an anti-theists. If you believe that existence is not a sentient being and it's an inanimate, dust ball, then that doesn't have its own, feelings and intrinsic sense of self, then you are an anti-theist. And if you are an anti-theist, you have to have inconsistencies in your ideology in order to correctly, organize these four primary priorities of truth, meaning, fitness, and grace. I love this list. I wouldn't change any of them. I haven't given it, that much deep thought, but I've given it enough thought to where I really don't think I would change any of them. And it's funny how so many things on these lists of four end up just like, four primary perspectives, the four primary priorities, the four, what is the four other ones? In my models here. By the way, if you would like to contribute to this project and you find this meaningful and would like to help monetarily contribute, I would be able to get a faster computer and faster internet. There is a link down below. No pressure. But so you say the primary processes, which is like, creation, communication, cognition, and decision. Then you have the four primary perspectives, which is inside, outside, separate, and oneness. And you have the four primary priorities, which is truth, meaning, fitness, and grace. This fourfold structure is the backbone of existence. It's the backbone of God. That's what it is. It is the primary requirements or foundation of mind, self-reference, which is self-awareness, and which is sentience, because feeling, which is what defines sentience, comes from contextualizing thoughts in relation to the self. So, but it's like you can't feel bad for anyone, which is what leads to you even having the chance to give, someone grace, if you don't identify their humanity with your humanity, or I guess not their humanity, their sentientness with your sentientness. This is why you just can't really make sense of any of these. So when I was an anti-theist, somebody said to me once, they were like, there is an objective morality. And I was like, there is no objective morality. I was like, the communists, they thought they were doing what was best. The Nazis, they thought that they were doing what was best. And, everybody thinks they're doing what's best. But what I didn't even realize that I was saying, this is what people thought they were doing that was best, but not what was best. You can't even almost think about that without it being defined by a sentient being, even though it seems like it's weird that it would be defined by a sentient being, but it's actually not, In your own life, that the one who makes the rules is the one who judges your performance a lot of times. And it's not even just makes the rules. It's the one who controls the environment of your existence. So like your parents, they are the ones that really decide, as long as they're aligned with an objective perspective of God, what is right and wrong for you to do. So, or they're the defining structure for you because they feed you or not. This is another thing that I'll get into later, but this is another instance in which our education system has destroyed our ability to understand hierarchy, because there's true hierarchy and then of dominance, which is who controls the environment that you exist in, and then there is this false hierarchy, which is who tells you what to do, and the disobeying of them is not actually like that. It's not objectively consequential. And I'm proof of that because I didn't do what teachers told me to do, and I'm still here and doing fine. But if you never did what your parents told you, you'd be dead. They said, "Oh, don't cross the street before looking both ways." Oh, okay, you choose not to, obey that, you'd be dead right now. There's a difference. One is a true hierarchy, one is it's an imitation of a hierarchy. And we'll talk more about that later. But these four simultaneous primary priorities of truth, meaning, fitness, and grace that Eric Weinstein has, laid out, they are all simultaneous in any objective understanding of reality. They are dependent upon each other, and there is no way to objectively move towards that which is more meaningful without also moving towards that which is more, moving towards more grace and also more truth and also more fitness. Okay? Every instance in which there is an apparent conflict between any of these four is a subjective perspective. And any instance in which all four of them are simultaneous is objective. It's fascinating. Many of you know, I am a Second Amendment advocate, and it's a big part of my life. And I'm a martial artist, and the incorporation of firearms training for self-defense into as part of my martial arts training is a big part of my life. There are 4 rules to gun safety, and it's not a coincidence that there are 4 rules. And they are treat every gun as if it is loaded, never point it at anything you're not willing to destroy, know your target and what's beyond it, and keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire. The thing is that you have to break all 4 of these rules in order to have a lethal accident. Okay, you can embarrass yourself, and you can do something that damages something, but if in order to hurt someone, not just damage like a lamp, but like to hurt someone, you have to break all 4 of these rules. You could break 3 of them and still just embarrass yourself. But if you break all 4, you're going to hurt someone. And that's because they are dependent and simultaneous, and moving towards the violation of one in an objective context that is defined by the goal that they are structured around, which is not to hurt someone, is such that any movement towards any one of them is a movement towards all of them simultaneously, and any movement away from any one of them is a movement away from all of them simultaneously. And there's also that symmetric relationship and that hierarchical relationship between them. Treating every gun as if it's loaded encapsulates all of the other rules, just like truth encapsulates grace and fitness and meaning, and oneness encapsulates separateness, and also because it's, oneness requires sovereignty. I'm one with myself because I am separate from anyone else. So it is included in the concept of oneness, separateness, and inside and outside is also included in the concept of oneness. So it's the same exact structure again and again and again and again and again. And this is why at the beginning of the stream, of the video that I'm providing commentary on, Eric says that the rules, the context or the structure of the rules of physics is the theory of everything. And which it's not the standard model. It's not even, I don't even know if it's physics at this point. It's like it is metaphysics. It's like, what is the relationship between all the elementary particles in the standard model? Why are they there? What is the rules of how do you go from, from this perspective to that perspective? Why are they organized into an apparent triality, but why is there a dualistic, reflective aspect to them? This is the structure of the rules. And fundamentally, or not fundamentally, most fundamentally, to the point of what I would say is primarily, which is even, I would say that's above in the hierarchy of truth. That which is primary isn't just fundamental because, at the base level, it's also first in order, primary, then secondary. So it's the primary perspectives, the primary priorities, the primary processes. These are that which precedes, any other possibility. And that's what it is, like any other possibility. So, but if there is no, the primary, the main takeaway from the understanding of these 4 primary priorities that Eric has laid out, and that's my label of them, but it's not my list, it's Eric's list, is that they are entangled to the point of dependent, and they are simultaneous in their existence from any objective standpoint, which means they're not in conflict. There is no such thing as the harsh reality. Okay? Because the objective truth is grace-giving. That is a huge lesson. And it is what understanding the structure and these 4 priorities and where they come from and the relationships between them is what allows for the understanding of objective morality. And to do it otherwise. And it is, and I will say this, understanding those four primary priorities. I'm not saying this is how Eric did it. It's possible he had, I don't believe in luck, but we could say it's possible he got lucky. I don't think it's possible to understand those actually outside the context of sentient singularity theory, which is the theory that existence is a sentient being that is creating other sentient beings within itself. And all that, that's the primary overview. But there's more to it, obviously, than that. But in Eric's understanding from what he's saying is that, to give a little bit towards one is to take a little bit away from another. To be giving of more grace is to sacrifice some fitness, and to be giving of more truth is to be, distracting of some meaning. But I say no. I say within maybe the context of like a geometric unity type of perspective, sure. And I actually agree with that. Which is about geometric relationships in a singular structure. But sentient singularity theory is about the nature of that singular structure. Okay, not just the apparent geometric form of it, but why does it have that geometric structure? Not just what is that geometric structure. And so it's from a subjective perspective, yes, to increase grace is to sacrifice fitness, and to increase fitness is sometimes to sacrifice grace, and then to increase truth is to sacrifice meaning. But in objective, in the most true objective perspective of reality, from the perspective of absolute reality, there is no instances in which you sacrifice some meaning for truth, or you sacrifice some fitness for grace, or you give more grace at the sacrifice of fitness. You just either increase fitness, grace, and meaning and truth simultaneously, or you don't. And there isn't even a way of decreasing truth and meaning and fitness and grace objectively, only subjectively. But objectively, you can increase truth, meaning, fitness, and grace, and they all increase together simultaneously. Always. That's the most beautiful idea I think anybody could be aware of, almost. Or at least is the most beautiful conclusion to draw from the most beautiful idea, which is that existence is a sentient being like you and me, and chose to create us, that is the most beautiful truth. But the most beautiful conclusion of that is that there is no sacrificing of grace and fitness and meaning and truth at the expense of or for the sake of the other, or there is no gaining of one of these at the expense of the other. It's just always growth simultaneously of all of these, and they never decrease. Actually, it's impossible. That's why when I was explaining, when Eric was explaining the isomorphism with the different types of numbers and their relationships via the operations of addition and multiplication, it was always positive, or at least it seemed to be at that. There was no ending up in the negative numbers. You could get from negative to positive, but you weren't ending up in negative. That's why, multiplying two negatives together gets you a positive, but multiplying two positives gets you a negative, gets you also positive. And it's like there is no such thing as negative. There's just growth, and decay is a subjective viewpoint. So it's a lot, but it's very important, and it's probably the biggest takeaway from this. And let's see here. Just a few more, and we'll go. But that's probably the most important takeaway from this entire stream. And it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful.
I do think that something more real. I think that the element of risk, when you go rock climbing, it's fairly safe. It's not perfectly safe. If you flew wingsuits with somebody, that would be sort of an equivalent of war, because that's really dangerous. The squirrels do the fatality, I think, in part because people get addicted to proximity flying or something. But yeah, you have to do something that has some actual real risk. It can't be simulated all the time.
This is Taleb's concept of skin in the game, right? That we need decision makers that are connected to the consequences of their decisions. If it's separated, or there's a safety net, or there's some externalization of that cost of their decisions.
The last one is the biggest issue.
Yeah, systems collapse.
Yeah. I don't know what to do about that, because that's what we've done. We keep externalizing the consequences and risks of our action.
Okay. Oh, this is something that's too important not to touch on, though. Even though the last one would have been such a good point to end on, this is so important. This is also correct, obviously. Robert Breedlove and Eric Weinstein are both totally correct, and there's so many instances in which this is apparent. It's apparent in education. It's apparent in finances. It's apparent in corporate work environments and war and everything. Everything. Even the constructs that we rely upon for our scientific understanding are no longer connected to what they need to be in order to actually be incentivizing of that which we need to be incentivized. Incentivizing of maximizing their original purpose. And so a perfect example of this, here. They're discussing having skin in the game, which is obviously the necessity for something to be, for those in the system to be connected to the outcomes of the system, and that system be judged based, those outcomes be judged based on the original goal of the system itself, essentially. So a very good example of this, and there's many, is like student loans and education and all of its ripple impact on society. So I was just an aside. I was thinking the other day, it's like, how many archaeologists do we need? And do you really need them to go to college in order to be like good archaeologists? Or are they just going to be good because they are so passionate about archaeology? I am an expert on herpetology, which is the study of reptiles and amphibians. An expert. Like, you cannot show me a reptile that I could not tell you what it is. You couldn't do it. And I've had many people try. I've never gone to school for herpetology. I've never taken a class on reptiles and amphibians. I took a field studies class in my senior year of high school, and I knew every single, flora and fauna in the Sonoran Desert, which was what the class was about. Not because of the class, but because I sat outside of class memorizing the encyclopedia of snakes and birds and fish and dogs and cats and, spiders and whatever. And these systems that we've created are meant to be causative and are not even correlative anymore of representing understanding. I have a diploma in finance. I am not the best person to talk to about finance. I'm not even close, and I'm not an expert, and I would be a horrible hedge fund manager, which was originally what I wanted to do, because I don't care about the game of money, really, like money objectively. I care about it could get me, which are specific things and that I could turn it into, but like a piece of land with, stream or something. But I don't care about money. And you have to care about that system and money that a lot in order to, and the environment of money, and in order to be, the best at it. Just like, and if you do care about it, you're not going to be held back or enabled or boosted even, really, by the classes that you take in academia. So your diploma is it's not even a good correlative proxy. And it is because this system of education has been detached totally from having any skin in the game in which, as far as, its relation to the original goals. And perfect example of this is student loans. This is just another instance in which we further detached like a system from consequence and people from consequence, really. And it has had a disastrous impact because it has reduced our willingness for grace, our understanding of the truth, and our our ability to be fit, and the meaning of our actions. Okay, it has reduced all of them simultaneously because of a detachment that has been formed where there's no consequence for loaning money to people to go to school at all, because you cannot declare bankruptcy on student loans, and the money for most people, there's no consequence for individuals in loaning this money to other individuals, because a lot of these loans come from the government, which just prints money. And then there's because of that, there's also no consequence or there's just a breakdown of values, okay? And it is because it's not people giving the money actually who are accountable for return, and the people who are taking the money are not being held accountable for return, because who's holding you accountable? The government? How are they gonna know whether or not your dance degree was profitable for the government? There was no goal in giving you the money. It was just diversity and inclusion taken to the extreme, which he talks about in one of the next clips, which is just that there's diversity and inclusion through merit, and because there's a goal that is objective and is related to the meritocracy, that the judgment of the meritocracy that has been formed. And then so long as there is no they're only taking people who are really, really good at violin, and they don't care about your race or your age or your sex, then it is inclusion. But it's not, where we've got this false proxy for inclusion, which is equal dispersion of already subjectively defined categories, okay? which means that you cannot build from subjectively defined categories to an objective objectively inclusive environment. The environment has to be defined by a goal that is objective, and the goal cannot be inclusivity. If it's a subjective environment. If it's an objective environment of existence itself, then yeah, it's defined by inclusivity. But that's for God to handle, Like, he can give people grace and get everybody to where they need to be. But we have to have subjective environments that can have objective goals that are objectively defined by and governed by and judged by an objective goal, which is, the goal of herpetologists would be, the understanding of reptiles and amphibians, I guess, or the advancement of the understanding of reptiles and amphibians to some type of useful degree. Maybe it helps treat snake bites or something. I don't know. But there's a way in which to look at it that is objective. And then you use that to construct judgments that are inclusive of anybody who is fulfilling of the meritocratic requirements of the group. And so if you detach the goal, you have detached the meaning, and that detaches any incentive to move towards truth. It's like, why have biology be about biologically observable truths if it is, if there's no meaning to, these degrees? You can't, like I said, these are all simultaneous priorities. You can't separate them off. And as soon as you do, then you're screwed. You're just going to decay, is what happens. And like you said, system collapse. We're having this with education. It is also having, this ripple effect is being seen across corporate environments and political, the political landscape and the academic and educational, institutions. And so, and even people who get like up in arms about like, oh, we need standardized testing. It's like, well, standardized testing is helpful in certain circumstances if you have a standardized goal. Like the standardized, you can't judge. The issue, there's no issue with standardized tests. The issue is judging by standardized tests. So when you say the standardized test of, or America is, third in the world in education. Why? Because of, judging by these standardized tests. Problem is that a standardized test is already a proxy. It's not causative. Okay, this is an instance where correlation is similar to causation, but it's not. And if you detach causation, you're detaching consequence. You're detaching skin in the game. And, they're talking about rock climbing, and I rock climb. And Eric is actually wrong about something that he said here. He said, and I get what he's saying because earlier he's mentioning war, and he said rock climbing is not a good proxy for war because it's fairly safe, but wingsuit flying might be a better proxy for war. The reason why war is used is because it's obvious today what the consequences are of war still. In most circumstances, that's not even true always, because drones are detaching us from having further skin in the game. If you're not in danger, then there's no, it's not war anymore if you're not in danger. And you can't even conceptualize of the purpose of war if there is no danger to you. The purpose of war is no longer meaningful and graceful and true, or even fit, if you're just going to be blowing people up on the other side of the world who aren't a threat to you. But you're totally detached from consequence. at least subjectively. But I'm a rock climber, and it's not the amount of danger that is defining or the likelihood of, lethal accident that is defining of whether or not something is real, and which is what is required for you to have skin in the game. I once climbed a 420-foot or 410-foot, something around there, spire in Sedona with a friend of mine. It was the first spire I ever climbed. It's called Dr. Rubo's Wild Ride. And it was one of the most frightening experiences of my life. I was petrified sometimes, like I couldn't even move. There's a part where you have to walk along the outside of the spire while you're about over 300 feet in the air. You're totally exposed, and you have to go around it, and you have no idea what's on the other side because you're rounding the corner, and then you have to go up, and you have no idea what is up. So sometimes you can look above you in rock climbing, and you can see the path, and you can be like, okay, I can probably do that. At least I know where I'm going. Or you can see your partner, and this is a multi-pitch, so someone goes up then and belays. Someone climbs while you belay them, and then they belay you from above, and while you climb up, and you just inchworm your way up because it's too high for one rope. And but there was a point where my friend was being cocky, and he unclipped. You always have two anchors, and he unclipped one, and then unclipped the other, and then clipped both to the new anchor. Okay. And instead of unclipping one, clipping it to the anchor, and then unclipping the other and clipping it to the anchor. And I looked at him and I was like, don't you ever do that again while I'm climbing with you. And we were standing on a platform, okay, it was about the size of a small desk. And so if you're standing on a desk, you're probably not going to fall unless, somebody moves the desk. But still, the consequences of falling if the desk is 300 feet high is absolutely lethal, even though it's not likely that you're going to fall. And I was like, do you realize that if you fall, I will watch you die, and then I will be stuck on this rock, unable to get off because you need two people to belay down. I would need to literally be waving down helicopters and hoping, that someone passes by and sees me and hears my screams for help. Like, it was unlikely that we would have had any kind of lethal accident. It felt like a quest, like no other quest I've ever been on. It felt like I was going to drop the ring into Mordor. And, there's a point where I'm grabbing onto the top, and there's this tree at the very top, like a bonsai what is it? In Mr. Miyagi, Karate Kid, where he goes and he steals that bonsai from that dangerous spot. And there's a little bonsai at the very top, just like it. And I grabbed onto the bonsai because I slipped, and there was a bunch of snow at the very top, but there was no snow visible because on the ground it had all melted. And at the very top, it was still cool enough where it was there. It was all wet because it was melting. And my feet at this point, this is the very last platform at the very top, we're just dangling in midair over 350 feet of open air. And I was roped in though, so if I had fallen, I would not have probably even gotten hurt, but I probably would have been stuck, which is not good. And but that doesn't mean though that this was without possibility of lethal consequences, real consequences. My friend in that very benign moment almost, where we're not doing anything epic looking, you're just standing on a platform, unhooked himself totally, and he shouldn't have done that. And the consequences if he had fallen were real. And that's all you need. You don't need a likelihood of death as if you were, a special forces soldier or you're a wingsuit flyer. You just need the possibility of real consequences. And, in my high school, they had a ropes course, and I took it, and it was the greatest accomplishment for me in elementary school because I was petrified of heights at the time, and I ended up setting records in the class. But the consequences were real, even though there had never been a really bad accident. And the year after I left, though, somebody did exactly what my friend did, and they unclipped themselves both anchors at the same time. They were in the advanced ropes class, And they were in a situation where they thought, I'll never fall. It's like there's likelihood of them falling is as likely as me falling off of this bench that I'm sitting on. But that one time they did fall and they broke their back and they are now paralyzed. And they ended up getting rid of the entire program because of it, even though people signed waivers, which is horrible. And we further detached, again, our education system, and which is the outsourcing of the raising of our own children from risk. And this is what happens when you outsource the raising of your children. You give them to people who can't afford to take risks, so don't take risks, and then, therefore, the entire system devolves. This is also what happens when you don't allow for bankruptcy in loans, because there's no consequences. And so once I said to Michael Knowles, and it's like when I used to work at PragerU, I went up to Michael Knowles and I was like, listen, man, I think I figured out the solution to the student loans. And he was like, what do you think? And I was like, nobody is going to agree to abolishing all student loans, to, just erasing them. And nor should they, really, because nobody's being held to account in that, and you're not fixing the incentive structures. And also, it's not okay to not allow for people to declare bankruptcy on these student loans, because first of all, they're predatory, and if you can't declare bankruptcy, it doesn't hold the government accountable, because basically they're always going to get their money back. So it's always a good investment for them, even though you're now incentivizing the giving of loans that cannot be forgiven, and it's being incentivized because of the interest that's being generated and the control, instead of the goal being the enabling of a productive education. Okay, so the learning of something that then people can use to be productive in society. And so you've detached it from the goal. And I said to Michael Knowles, nobody's ever going to be okay with forgiving all the student loans. They shouldn't. And nobody is going to be, and it doesn't fix anything, nobody's going to be okay with never giving any loans ever again, and for any instance, because that actually is kind of detached from government as well. Like, the government has a vested interest, the Commonwealth has a vested interest in the competency of its citizens, in the relevant competency of its citizens. And it's also lacking in any kind of grace. So you need to allow people to declare bankruptcy on their student loans, and that's it. If people can declare bankruptcy on their student loans, I would declare bankruptcy on my student loans. And so would many other people. Many others. At this point, at least, I would. And what that does is now it holds the entire system to account. The loaners can lose money, and it can be obvious. You can actually make a judgment, even though it's the government that's giving the loan. It's still like you can judge whether or not it was profitable or not, because if people declare bankruptcy, it wasn't profitable. Okay. Whereas if they don't, then it's always profitable so long as they're paying. And you're also allowing people to get free from being constrained by being attached to these loans that paying them isn't allowing for them to build families and houses, which the government has a vested interest in as well. And it also holds you accountable, because if you declare bankruptcy on your student loans, then you take a massive credit hit and you can't get more loans, because for a while at least, because until there's a grace period, you receive grace at the end of 7 years, because you shouldn't. You've proven that you're not a reliable person to lend to. But it also punishes the people who loaned to you. Anybody who's giving a loan to anyone without even a statement of their goals, okay, this is just irresponsible. And why give people loans for studying women's studies or men's studies, whatever, it doesn't matter. But it's not profitable. In fact, it's leading to decay. But Michael Knowles, which I really like Michael Knowles, we were always like, friendly to each other, and but he looked at me and was like, well, that seems like it will destroy he was like, I don't know, that seems like it will destroy the entire system. I was like, yeah, that's the point. He was like, sounds dangerous. And I was like, what is your goal? Now it doesn't, like, what is his goal? It seems like he's now abandoned his goal, but still, regardless, like, it's important to be attached to real consequences. But at least especially in subjectivity. In objectivity, there's grace, and that is a choice, not by us, honestly. But subjectively, in order to make any kind of subjective judgment, those who are judging must be those who have understanding, and those who have understanding are part of the system. Okay, you must feel the effects. I've said before, if you don't have a driver's license and not just know how to drive, but you drive, if you don't drive anywhere, you should not be making the rules of the road. You would be detached, and that leads to a lack of understanding. And this is extremely relevant, though, to a theory of everything, and that is because we have detached ourselves from the rules of the system totally. Okay? In physics. And that's why we're making no advancements. And it's not just that the idea of, well, the observer is part of the, influences reality, every observation, causes the collapse of a wave function. Like, you don't even know what that is, what the collapse of a wave function is, if you don't know what is the nature of the system in which that collapse is taking place and those waves are taking place. And that's what happens when you detach yourself from it. And I mean, the more you attach yourself to your understanding of existence, the more you will understand it. And if you understand that existence is a sentient singularity, a mind that has the same structure as yours, essentially, it allows you to understand what the collapse of a wave function is. But that is not a statement made in this video, but that I'm providing commentary on. But to link the concepts described in this video to the perspective that I have, that I believe is true, and that is the context or the perspective of sentient singularity theory, that is how attached you need to get. Is you need to see that reality follows the rules that you follow. It's not separate. We're just trying to separate everything right now. And but when we realize this, it will be the end of physics. It will be the end of our understanding of, the constraints and degrees of freedom of physics, which is, the constraints and degrees of freedom of entanglement of, the structures of mind. But I think that geometric unity is an important part of this. Not in any opposition to anyone who I have on here. I really don't see any theories out there, unless your theory is like anti-theist theory, or then none of these theories are in conflict with my perspective. And I'm not being critical of anybody in this. That's not the, or at least that's not the goal. Like I've said before, goal is to show you valuable conversations, discussions, ideas, and people in this this journey of physics, metaphysics, morality, and the quote-unquote theory of everything. And Eric Weinstein is definitely one of these people. Robert Breedlove appears to be also one of these people. If you are into especially the the financial context of these same ideas, and I recommend watching this entire discussion that I went through, and also the previous ones, because they're all very good. Subscribe to Eric Weinstein's channel on YouTube, and also Robert Breedlove. And hit the like button if you found this valuable. Share it. That is the first episode of this discussion series, this live discussion series. They will be every week, Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. And next week we'll discuss a different conversation with different people. And then once a month, I will be doing a produced video. The first one this month is going to be probably presented at the beginning of next month, but it might be the end of this month, which will be the not live produced videos on certain topics. But the first one is Sentient Singularity Theory, and that will be timed simultaneously with the release of my paper. So with that, I will answer any final questions, then I will go. This was a bit longer than they will normally be, but this is the first one. I still think it stayed on point, and I think that this is a good way of doing the lives going forward. Let me know what you think in the comments, and like I said, hit the like button, share it, and subscribe, hit the bell notification if you want to be notified next time we go live. And if you would like to join our Discord, where we have weekly live discussions or live calls that are open on any topic that you wish, every Thursday at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, private message me on Instagram, either Theory of Everyone or Tyler Marshall Goldstein, and I will send you the link. I learned today that about a third of the population may not be able to understand hypothetical question. I don't know exactly what that means, but I believe it. Women don't like that sort of thing. Now, if chess was about taking care of others, dealing with drama, women would dominate. It would be different if it was about taking care of others. It's not about thinking strategically. It's about reacting and caring. It's different. But yes, women, if chess was about taking care of people, women would dominate. And men would not be in the top 500. But if sentient beings are the objective structure, they are also what is objectively, if they are objectively truthfully what exists, then they are objectively truthfully what is meaningful. And also that leads to it being meaningful that you maximize them and like that causes men and women to be meaningful to each other instead of just like in competition. So there's so much that comes from this idea, and anti-theists or what Eric described as secularists, I don't think that that's the right term. Secularism implies that it's just like it's not that your worldview is not based on religion. It's based on truth detached from religion. But anybody who truly believes in the truth of their theological tradition does not believe that it is separate from anything, and you can't. And the idea of a secularist, separating, it's like saying to have a secular government, quote unquote, is like to separate the truth from the truth. But really what it is to have a secular government, what the goal of a secular government is to be allowing of grace of people, and is to be giving people autonomy because you value them as sentient sovereign beings, and also taking care of them because they have meaning, and also giving them grace. And that's why you don't hold them to whatever hard interpretations of scriptural punishments that you can deduce. But there is no such thing as a secular government. There's no such thing as a theist or as a, I don't want to say there isn't such thing as a theocratic government. There is only a theocratic government. If theism is true and if existence is a sentient being, there's only a theocratic government or there's no government, which is kind of what we're seeing. It's almost like what happens with moral anarchy. It's just survival of the fittest in a subjective perspective, but not in an objective perspective, which is actually leading to the collapse of the system. Did you cover their discussion on Bitcoin? Not yet, but I will. That's a different discussion. The only thing about Bitcoin that was discussed that I will discuss, or at least touch on right now with this discussion with Eric and Robert, which is their 7th episode, is this, just because you asked about it, and then I'll go. This is actually the final clip that I had listed, so this is good.
The anti-counterfeiting squad that are covering for the flaw in Bitcoin, which is that you can create an infinite number of coins. And then you have the other problem, which is the stench of Bitcoin, which is your identity and your wallet may be anonymous, but the transactions are not.
Yeah, the first point.
So this is these are very wise observations by Eric. And I don't know the exact way to fix them. I'm not a cryptocurrency expert, and I don't claim to be, but I do recognize some inconsistencies in at least the common understanding of a lot of the the concepts involved in crypto, the common concepts. And one of them is that there's the scarcity aspect of Bitcoin is dependent upon almost, or at least seems to depend upon, the eventual unification of all transactions under one currency, not Bitcoin and Ethereum and Dogecoin and Crown Sterling sovereigns and all these others. It seems like there has to be some type of objective unifying value store, like a currency. There has to be some type of unifying currency. But it might also be necessary to have subjective currencies, though, which is something totally new that we've never had. It's just, dollars. And there's dollars being used in, the buying of gas for your car, and then there's dollars being used for, the paying of your student loans, and maybe there needs to be a different currency for each of these, and that are then unified under one currency under that. I don't know. But it is a problem that there is. It's not a lack of scarcity that's the problem. It's actually a lack of accountability. Scarcity doesn't actually objectively exist, and there's just a lack of accountability when you detach things from consequences. So you need to, the way in which you would get around this, because I don't actually believe that the scarcity aspect of this is necessarily great. Of a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, not all of them have a intrinsic scarcity because they don't all have set limits to the amount that is being minted, but or mined, whatever. But it needs to be, the amount of a currency out there needs to be tied to something that is directly tied to the objective goal. Okay, so maybe that's tied to the amount of people in the world. Maybe, but it needs to be tied to something objectively meaningful within the context of the goal. What is the goal of us? You know, there's many goals, but what is like the primary objective goal? I would say to reproduce. It's not the only goal, but humanity itself needs to grow. And if you don't have that, you will decay and you'll invert the societal pyramid and you will have collapse. But it also, you'll destroy meaning, because if you're not doing it for your kids and your grandkids, or your siblings' kids and their grandkids, or your nieces and nephews, like if you're not doing the things that you're doing for the sake of other people that are coming after you, then there's no meaning to what you're doing. Almost, or at least it destroys the continuity of meaning. So I would say that there needs to be some type of link to the amount of people in the world. And I've thought that for a while. I don't know the details of it, but if anybody listening is smart enough to figure that out, go for it. And so that there's this accountability for the amount of currency out there compared to the amount of people. It doesn't have to be, there's a set amount of Bitcoin, and once that's it, it's it. It's like, why is that? How does that in any way reflect anything that is true objectively? Subjectively, yeah, sure. Objectively, no. Maybe the objective currency that links all the other currencies needs to be linked to the amount of people in the world, and all the subjective currencies within that, those need to be maybe, finite in the amount that is mineable, because then you're into, you're at the level of relativity, to the point where there is such a thing as nothingness. Like, there's no apples in my fridge, but there's you can't have no somethingness in your fridge. That doesn't exist. There is no such thing as nothing, objectively, but subjectively, yes, there's no apples in my fridge. But, so maybe the no apples thing needs to have, a specific currency for, I don't know, gold. If gold is finite resource, then maybe that needs a finite coin. But then if there's another resource that isn't finite, that's scalable, linked to the amount of people in the world generally, maybe that needs to just be linked to the amount of people in the world or something, and relative to it. It's not, just finite at this arbitrary amount. It's like, oh, well, we're going to have, I don't know how many Bitcoin they're minting, but who chose that number and why? I don't know. Maybe there was a reason, but I can't think of how that could be objective. And the other issue, though, with a cryptocurrency, with Bitcoin, is that there is, or at least not all cryptocurrency, but with Bitcoin, is that the transactions are public on the blockchain. And that's a blockchain issue. It's not really a Bitcoin issue. It's a blockchain issue. And I understand that. And that's hard too, because you need someone to, the same kind of system is the problem. You need someone who can objectively look at the entire blockchain and judge it. But then you also need people who are subjectively judging, based on whether or not they are relevant to the transaction at all. And maybe you have different levels of viewability where, I don't know, only those and someone else is who is, I don't know, someone else who is trusted or something, or relevant in some way to a transaction that is done, are able to see the transaction history or certain transactions in the history of transactions on the blockchain. But you need to eliminate like that, the moral stench of like where energy has been, because it's not grace giving. If you can't, it's like laundering money. It's like if you knew what every single dollar, it's like I have $1 in my bank, in my wallet. If I knew every single the history of that dollar, and and it's not just $1. It's a lineage of information transfers, okay, which is actually a lineage of actions. If I knew the history of the entire lineage of actions that led up to that dollar being in my wallet, it would be corrupted. And especially if everybody could see it, you're going to run into so many problems with this politically, because fundamentally the context of monetary transactions is within groups of people. And so you have to take that into account. You can't detach it. Say, well, it's supply and demand. It's not just supply and demand. It's just not profit. It's not just profitability. Why are companies posturing about, sexuality every February if this is just about profit and revenue? It's not. It's you're operating within the context of people, and people are going to be like, well, your money was comes from these has a history that leads back to blood, diamonds or something like that. It's going to cause problems. We already do this with diamonds. You don't think we're going to do this with money on cryptocurrency on the blockchain? We're going to absolutely do it. And say, this is, that's blood Bitcoin, because it had a history linked to, tribal warfare in the Middle East. We're going to do that. It's going to cause problems. And there's also other problems that, that are also going to arise from that. The blockchain and its actual use as the context and environment of human transactions has so many positives, and it also has so many negatives. And fixing those negatives and keeping those positives is about contextualization. Not abandonment or embracing, it's just about contextualizing. So, there's a lot, that's true of pretty much everything. We need to shift our perspective on things in order to, make actual sense of them, or objective sense of them. Like, shift your perspective on, is it true that men outplay women in chess, like, to a ridiculous degree where it's literally black and white? No pun intended. Yes. Is that horrible? Well, if your perspective is men versus women, then yeah, that's horrible. It's not even. But even if your perspective is men versus women, then why is evenness even good? Why is that perspective even good? It's not. You have to shift your perspective. Abandon that idea or not abandon, but shift away from subjectivity into objectivity. But you have to know how to do that, and then realize, sentient beings are the context of value. They are truth. They are what is meaningful, and they are, capable and deserving of grace, and also, because of that, and all that all the conclusions that leads to, now men are good at chess for the sake of women, and it's beautiful. We didn't even change anything. We don't have to change the game to make it easier for women. We don't have to handicap men in order for to increase women and make it more even. We just say men's skill in this is for the sake of women. But you can't say men are good at chess for the sake of women, because chess is just a game of competition between individuals. But when you understand further context and you realize that it's a proxy for an ability, which is the ability to think strategically and accomplish goals and solve problems, then you realize that in that context, it's men are good for the sake of women. But you can't even say men are good at chess for the sake of women, because you're not good at chess for the sake of women. You're good at thinking strategically for the sake of women if you're a man. You're good at caring for others for the sake of men if you're a woman. And it's just this is very complicated. But it's complicated because it's like super simple. It's not just simple. It's super simple. And that which is super simple is in front of your face all the time, which is what makes it hard to see. It's the fish trying to understand water. It's always underwater. It has to even first realize that it's underwater and that everything that it does is in the context of water. And that's hard because our mind operates on, our mental structure is requiring of differentiation, which is, how do you differentiate outside of something that is not always there? This is problem with the concept of falsifiability in science. And when people are like, oh, well, panpsychism, in order to understand it objectively and the truth of it, you have to realize that materialism is also true and that both have to be contextualized and they're two sides of one coin. But right now, when neither one is contextualized, they're not two sides of one coin. They're just two non-existent, descriptions, or attempted descriptions. But then when people say, if you do assume that panpsychism is true, which it is, it's just not, chairs are not conscious, but molecules and cells and organisms and atoms are. So the atoms and molecules in the chair are sentient, or at least the atoms, but the chair is not conscious. But the chair only exists within the context of a sentient being's, perception. This is the true panpsychism. And people say things like, well, it's just the problem with that is just would not be falsifiable. Well, maybe sometimes things that aren't falsifiable is because they're true. So always, if something's always true, it can't ever be falsifiable. So getting to the objective, absolute truth of reality, it's not going to be falsifiable. We don't even think about that. So this is tough. And it's tough to see the things that are not always in front of your face. Those are the toughest things to see. The things that are always in front of your face are the hardest are things to understand. So with that, that's it. And I thank everybody for listening. I appreciate all of you. And I hope that you found this valuable. Like I said, please hit the like button, share this. And if you'd like to join our Discord community, send me a private message on Instagram to either of my profiles. So maybe there will be strains of currency made up of a variety of others that back it. Yeah, maybe. It doesn't really matter how many there are when they're infinitely divisible. Exactly, Ethan. That's exactly the point. So it's like, why not just start with one? I think we will see some currency arise where it's like one monad currency, one monad coin or something, and it's just like infinitely divisible. But it has to be linked to something real. Otherwise, if it's just infinitely divisible subjectively, that's not meaningful. So you need to link it to something objectively meaningful, which is sentient beings somehow, some way, not just not if any currency that's linked to non-sentient beings, like gold. Like, I mean, atoms of gold are sentient, but still. But linking it to like pounds of gold or something, that is not. What that's not gonna work. So, all right. Thanks, and we are well past the amount of time that I was hoping this would go. But next one will be much quicker. But thanks, and I will see you guys next week. Peace.